Hey folks, Ray from Rainmaker.com here. Today I'm here to give you all the information you need to know about Active Track with the DJI Spark. In a lot of ways, it's kind of similar to past DJI products, for example, like the Mavic or the Phantom series, but there are some nuances that are sort of important to understand and where it's going to work well and where it's not going to work well. The first thing to understand is that the Spark only contains Active Track and not Follow Me. Whereas you compare to something like the Mavic here, the Mavic actually has both. What's the difference? Well, with the Spark and with the Mavic, when you use the term Active Track, it means that it's using the camera on the front of the unit itself to track you as an object. So it sees me as a person, and as I move around, it follows that object as a person or as a golf cart. It seems popular on YouTube. Whatever it may be, it's going to follow that object until it can no longer track that object. So if that object goes behind a tree, for example, it'll lose that object, and in some cases it may pick it back up if it happens very, very quickly. But if you go behind the tree for more than like a few seconds, then it usually loses you permanently. Whereas with Follow Me mode, it'll go ahead and use on the Mavic the remote control, and it'll actually follow the remote control's location as opposed to the object. So you actually have to have the phone in the remote control, and it'll go ahead and send the GPS from this remote to the Mavic, and it simply follows the remote wherever you're going. That works well in cases like trees and stuff like that, because it allows you to go below the trees or underneath the tree cover, and it can keep on following you. The downsides are some limitations on distance. For example, with the Follow Me mode on the remote control, you have to be a minimum of 10 meters up from the object, so 33 feet roughly. So that kind of makes it a little bit harder to get those kind of cooler, closer shots. So they each have their pros and cons. And again, with the Follow Me, you're not likely to lose the object. It'll keep on going wherever you're going. But the Spark does not have Follow Me mode. There's actually a bunch of modes that the Spark does not have that the Mavic does, but the most important one for this conversation is lack of Follow Me. So with the Spark, you only have Active Track. And within the Active Track, you have two options. Number one is to use the phone by itself. So throw away the controller, you're not even gonna use it at all, and you're gonna simply use the phone to control the Spark as you go along and set up that Active Track. And what you do there is you go ahead and I'll walk through this all in a moment, you're gonna choose the object you're following using the phone, and it's gonna be within the Wi-Fi range of the phone to the Spark. The downside of that, though, is when you're in that mode of just phone to Spark, you're limited to 100 meters. And I'm not talking like the potential distance that you'll get. I'm talking it's actually hard set in the configuration for 100 meters is the maximum flyable distance from the Spark to the remote. Except it's not to the remote, it's to your takeoff point. And that's a really important catch that a lot of people miss. So that means if I take off right here in front of me, and then I walk 100 meters down this road, and I take my phone with me, even if I'm only a few meters away from this phone, it'll actually hit the 100 meter marker and stop right there, because it's 100 meters from the point I took off. Now you can go in the settings on the phone and reset your home point on any one point in time. So you can go ahead and just set that home point and updates it, keeps on going. But if you're cycling along or if you're running or things like that, it's going to be kind of hard to do that because you have to interact with the phone while you're doing whatever cool thing you're trying to film. So that is a bit of a downside. Whereas if you use it with the remote control here, then you no longer have that limitation. So in that case, you can go ahead and you can go as far as you darn well want on your given track, as long as these two can talk to each other. So you can go, for example, 3 kilometers long while you cycle along for 3 different kilometers or a couple miles, and there's no problem at all as long as you've set in the settings to allow that far from the home point. So again, I'm not talking about the distance between the remote control and the Spark, I'm talking the distance between the Spark and wherever it took off from. Okay, so now that we've covered the two basic modes of Active Track, there's actually a half a mode extra that I didn't really talk about, which was in the gesture tracking mode. So if you throw away both these things and have just the Spark in front of you, you can of course take off from your hand, all the stuff that you've seen a million times over again. Technically speaking, that is actually doing a form of active tracking when it follows you around doing that. But since you can't really control the video and stuff like that within that mode, I'm gonna go ahead and skip that for right now. The last thing I wanna briefly mention here is around obstacle avoidance. So with the Spark, you only have forward obstacle avoidance, which means that it can go ahead and not fly into this tree, hopefully right there. But if it's flying backwards as it tracks you, it will hit that tree, and that would be potentially a bad thing, or most definitely a bad thing. So in the settings menu, you have an option around obstacle avoidance and active tracking. The first is to allow active tracking while you're flying forward, and the second is to go ahead and allow active tracking while you're flying backwards. By default, that setting is disabled, so it does not allow it to go backwards, but you can go ahead and enable it. I would recommend that you do that only in scenarios where you know the entire terrain is clear. So I'm going to show you here on a road, I'm just around the corner, that I can see the trees around me. I'm going to put the Spark just above the tree line, and I'm going to allow it to loop around me, doing that backwards filming. that's fine in that case because I can see that it's going to maintain that height the entire time. The other thing to keep in mind is speed. The Spark is limited to 12 meters a second when it comes to active tracking, which translates to 26 miles per hour or about 42 kilometers an hour. So if you're cycling really fast, it's not going to work that well. And what I've seen in general is that when it's flying backwards and when it's doing those rotations around, it's not that stable with higher speeds. I'm usually finding issues beyond about 10 to 12 miles an hour going backwards. When it's following you from behind, so it's following like this, then it tends to be a bit better at a bit higher speeds because it's not trying to guess what you're doing. What I'm gonna do is kind of do two basic tests. I'm gonna show you what it looks like just running down the street, really simple stuff. I'm gonna do a basic kind of loop around me, and then I'm gonna show you what it looks like as I'm cycling down the same road to show you that same sort of thing at a higher speed and how well it tracks. And then I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about the 100-meter limitation there. Okay, so super easy to start the Active Track. In this case, I'm going to hit this little remote control icon on the left-hand side right there. I then choose Active Track on the screen, and then I simply tap myself. So I go ahead and choose that right there as me as an object, and that's it. And I click go. I can then go ahead and rotate around left and right. If I swing this little option out to the left, it rotates that way. 42% is so fast. If I go all the way to 100%, it's going to whip around me pretty darn quickly here. So you can see that. I go back the other direction, 100%. And it whips around the other way. What I found in general is that about 20% is the fastest you're going to want to go for it to stand, or 20-30% fastest you're going to want to go for it really to stand any chance of actually tracking you while you're moving forward. It seems to be pretty hesitant or pretty non-resilient to speed. So with that, we're ready to get rolling. I'm going to run down the street here and see if we can do this before we hit the low battery warning for the very end. You can see I'm holding my phone out to the side because I wanted to be able to have that Wi-Fi signal. It's very kind of weak between these two, and if I go just beyond that, I lose that signal pretty much instantly. I cancel my return to home point because I know where I am, pretty close by here. About 60 meters here. Hello, Mr. Dog, I don't know. So I should be beyond the limitations now. And you can see subject out of range. So at this point, it's at basically 100 meters, 95 meters. It has stopped. I'm out of range because of that 100-meter limitation and this really big dog right there that I don't know, that I'm really happy staying on that fence. So that is active tracking insofar as the phone and the limitation of what happens when it hits that virtual wall. It simply says I'm gone too far, it can't track anymore, and that's it. Okay, so as you saw on the road there while running, it generally tracked pretty well. If I went faster, that was no problem because I'm still well below the limitation of the speed for maximum tracking there. If I started turning the rotation faster, that's where it usually had issues, where it would drop out and lose me as an object, and I could run back into the picture and try to find that, but again, that's kind of complex. And the last challenging point there was the phone and Wi-Fi connection. So if I'm using the controller, it's not so much an issue, but if I'm using just the phone to the Spark, and if there's any point where your signal or your body is blocking the signal like this, then that usually will drop it, and that's a bad thing from a connectivity standpoint and a tracking standpoint, and the whole thing just stops. So that's what we saw on running. Let's go ahead and hit up the cycling side. Okay, so here we are with Active Track on the bike. Now I've got the remote control instead on my handlebars, and the reason is we've already done what it looks like with the cell phone. I want to show you how it tracks the remote control where the signal is no longer a limitation. I've got it connected here with 2 rubber bands, a little bit sketchy, not going to disagree, but it should hopefully hold. Sometimes you need a bit of sketch to get the right drone shot. The cell phone is in there with the clamps as is. That's the part that's probably going to fall off, hit the wheels, splinter a million pieces, and make an awesome viral video, but hopefully not. The one thing I want to point out is the max distance between the home point and the aircraft. You can see right there, 500 meters is what I set it to. You can do 5,000 meters. You can do whatever the heck you want up to 5,000 meters, but 500 meters to me is more than enough for what I want this demo to be. Any more than that, then something has gone horribly wrong. Let's go ahead and tap the Active Track or the intelligent flight mode options, hit Active Track there, tap on me as an object. It can't find me, so I'm gonna bring this down a little bit and come a little bit closer. I'm gonna put the gimbal down a little more, see if it can find me there. There we go. I'm gonna tap that go button, and now it's finding me, and now we're just gonna begin. I'm gonna start off nice and slow because I found in general it has a tough time if I don't do it slow to begin with. Got a little bit of heating issues on my phone right there, that warning you just saw, and we're tracking along. So, I'm not going super fast right now. I'm going maybe 8-9 miles an hour. Here we go, some nice smoother pavement. And you can see we're getting some dropouts there with the signal. It's kind of, there we go, a little bit better. it's just sort of the signal isn't great when I'm in front of it like this. Now I set it to the side of me, but of course it doesn't really catch up that well. So going down the hill here, I gotta kind of hold on the brakes a little bit, trying to keep out of the way for the signal. It's still there, it's still kind of cruising along, which isn't bad. Again, the limitation here is really the signal. You'll notice also I've gotten smaller. I'm going to switch over to the actual recorded video as opposed to live view screen because I've dropped out of the signal there. And it's staying basically static at the same height that I left it. So got some, finally got some cars coming up here. There's no cars in this all day long. So you can see it's still tracking though. I'm at, I don't know, 320 meters from my start point here. And let's see if we go around this one car. There's a really small country road. See, it's caught up to me now, which is not bad. It's still not off to the side though, where I left it. It's directly behind me. So it is just tracking right there in this case, which is all right. Now, here's where it gets tricky. We've got some trees coming up. So we'll see if it'll be able to hold on to that through the trees, if it'll find me or not. Sometimes it can do that. Just see Active Track ended, lost signal. And I think that's it. So RC signal lost. So it went a little too far, which is too bad because I'm really not that far away from it. So as you saw there, it works somewhat well, but not great. So it's kind of one of those things you can use in a pinch when you need to, but you definitely have to do it a bunch of times to get it right. This shot took many, many times to get right. Not that this one, but the one before it. It's not super easy. Also, make sure you're doing it somewhere you can control all the parameters, all the road, the scenario, everything like that, like I am here on a private, kind of closed road. Otherwise, you're just sort of asking for trouble. Pretty cool, huh? So let's talk about that 100-meter limitation. It's actually, yes, it's 100 meters, but you can get creative with it. So for example, if I start right here and fly 100 meters away, then I'm limited to 100 meters from this spot. But what if I went ahead and I went 100 meters down the road, set the home point there, came back to here and started. Now I can technically go 200 meters, 100 meters from here to the point where the home point is, and then another 100 meters beyond that because now I'm still within 100 meters of that home point. So you can see you can really get about 200 meters of distance on this within the limitations of the 100 meter minimum without having to go to the remote control, if you're creative about how you do it. So that might beg the question, what exactly is the Active Track good for? Sure, it works fine if you want to grab the remote control, and by fine I mean it works, but there's often a lot of failures. For example, in filming this segment over the last 4 or 5 days, I've had it lose tracking more times than I can count, where it just simply stops tracking mid-flight and I've got to stop and do it over again. But there are cases where it works fairly well. For example, if you watch all your favorite vloggers like John Olson or Casey Neistat or others, they aren't typically using drone shots as the entire video. Instead, they're using it from establishing shots and B-roll shots and other things that bring interest into a video. And in that case, active tracking is actually kind of useful. Take, for example, this little clip I just shot. So as you saw in that shot, it's a pretty cool shot, and it's something that used Active Track, using the automatic rotation around me. I'm not going beyond 100 meters. I'm not, doing something very fast or complex. I'm just running over some rocks. But that's a kind of shot you would see in a popular vloggers type of scenario where they're trying to establish something, make it look cool. If you had a group of friends, again, hiking up to the top of a ridgeline or hiking through trails to be able to just show you that overview, that's the kind of creativity that Active Track is ideal for. It's not yet great for sports. Again, maybe someday DJI will have a pod or something you can wear in your arm that'll just be perfect for sports. But today I'd say it's good for B-roll, it's good for establishing shots, it's good for just bringing interest to your otherwise larger story. There's one more scenario that's actually good for as well, which is the ability to give it to a beginner or someone who's not that good with controlling the drone from a camera standpoint, but is certainly capable of like the basics like takeoff and landing, and have them Active Track. And that's useful because then they can control the rotation around you, they can also control the altitude around you. So that's another scenario where Active Track is actually good for, that isn't necessarily just following yourself. So with that, Thanks for watching. Do not forget to check out the rest of my Spark videos. I've got one here somewhere on the screen. That's the wind testing I did. Really cool stuff with high wind and the Spark, and to show how well it worked. I've also got one coming up here on the remote control. It's kind of diving into the real nuances of this compared to the Mavic remote control. There's a lot of interesting differences there that are worthwhile noting. And then finally, do not forget to check out the full in-depth review in the description down below. That's coming up here in the next day or so if it's not already there. That is a ton more detail. It has all the footage from this as well. So I put all the raw footage up there of these different sessions so you can see what this actually looks like without any of the compression or changes or any of that good stuff. Way more photos and a ton of detail that I could not possibly fit into a single video. Do not forget to hit the subscribe button as well as the like button. I really appreciate it. Have a good one.